Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third episode of Dark Connector Musings, my new podcast. And if first two you haven't seen already, check out my channel, Dark Connector, on YouTube, where you will find a couple of things that may help you understand why did I start this podcast and what's going to happen next. And this today, it's actually the first time that I'm not talking about myself. I'm not talking about what I do. I'm actually talking with somebody that I would love to talk to. We just met, about months ago, a couple months and a half, and we hit it off right off the bat, and we started to talk, and sometimes it's really hard to stop. And let me introduce my today's guest. It's actually, I would like him to introduce himself. It would be more appropriate.
So, hi, I'm Denny Daniel, and I'm the curator and founder of the Museum of Interesting Things.
That's a very short and nice and sufficient introduction. It just piques people's interest right away. Museum of Interesting Things. I'm like, I know that we will get to your museum in a little bit, but before we do that, I would like to tell a little short story about you. Because we first collaborated on the second, actually on the fourth Muses Marathon, where you presented very nice, very exciting show about music, about history of music recording. And before that, my good friend and storyteller in chief, Laura Kincaid, wrote a very interesting article about you, about your story, about your life. And when I was reading today this article, one thing picked up my interest especially. I couldn't reconcile one thing. You told Laura that people in your family spoke 9 languages.
Yes.
Okay. When I was reading your history of your family, when your mother, if I'm not mistaken, she was born in Georgia, and your father in Azerbaijan, or it's vice versa?
Oh, it's vice versa.
It's vice versa. Mm-hmm. Okay.
My mom was born in Baku.
In Baku, and your father in Georgia. Okay, so he's in Tbilisi, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So Baku and Tbilisi. So right off the bat, we have 2 languages, Georgian and Azeri, and Russian, definitely, because they were born in Stalin's Russia, so it's 3 languages. Then, if I am not mistaken, they were smuggled, they actually moved or smuggled or run to Iran.
Right, Tehran.
Tehran.
Where they lived for a few years. And they met there. They were 10 years apart, and he used to walk her to school as a little kid. And that's where they were smuggled out of Iran into Israel.
Okay, so, but in Iran, they supposedly picked up Farsi.
Of course, yes.
Okay, so it's 4. So then they were smuggled to Israel, during the Shah revolution?
During the era of the Shah, my mother was orphaned, partially by Stalin, partially by the Shah. And so she managed to smuggle out of Persia in order to survive. My father was smuggling Jews into Israel. And so that organization smuggled her into Israel. And then again, they met in the army because he was injured and she was working in the hospital.
Okay.
And of course, after that, you have to get married.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's a Hebrew, it's 5.
Yes.
Hebrew is 5. One thing they taught in Soviet Union pretty well is how to count on your fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so it's 5. And then, if I'm not mistaken, they moved to Brazil.
Yes, where my brother was born in Israel, and then my sister, when they moved to Brazil, was born in Brazil. And my
Okay.
father had about 10 factories in Brazil and was designing and manufacturing shoes.
Okay, is this by any chance has something to do with this famous company that made shoes? For every shoes they sold, they donated one?
Yeah, it was a very big company. It was the biggest company probably in the world, distributor, and he was working for them. So his shoes were in Bloomingdale's and Macy's and Nine West and Florsheim and Tom McCann. His shoes were everywhere.
Okay, okay. So maybe my wife, when we just came to America, they bought some of them as well.
Oh, absolutely. You have to be.
Most
He did men's and women, so you probably wore his shoes, and she did.
Okay, okay. Did he leave any trademarks?
Like I said, it would be the Tom McCann shoe, the Giorgio Brutini, the almost all the moccasins, almost all the Huaraches were my dad.
Okay, sounds good. So it makes 6 Portuguese.
Portuguese, yes.
Okay. So, and then after that, they moved to United States, to Queens.
Right, and that's where I was.
Where you were born. So and English makes 7.
Right.
So which ones are 2 that we can't account?
The ones you're missing are Turkish and Aramaic.
Okay, so it's Turkish is a close relative of Azeri, and Aramaic is close relative of Hebrew. Understandable.
Right. Aramaic and Najdidan, which is a dialect of Aramaic.
Okay, okay. Woo. It's like Babylonian tower in one apartment.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
normally when people are have different languages in the same family, it's different generations. Normally, parents speak in the language that children don't understand in their former language. So, which one your parents talk to when you were a kid?
So we mix Hebrew and English all the time, very seamlessly. My parents, when they speak secrets about me, it's usually Persian, Aramaic, and maybe some Turkish. That's usually what they use to talk about us.
Okay, yeah, we actually we didn't have this pleasure because our son was born, he grew up with his grandparents, and they taught him Russian so well that he actually taught us some words afterwards. Okay. So we unraveled this language mystery.
Yeah, it kind of got me to be, comfortable and respect many people, many languages, many cultures. That's why when I did, a museum of interesting things, I didn't call it a museum of photography or music or literature, because I grew up with so many cultures and so many things that I wanted the museum to reflect the fact that, we can do that. Everything is interesting.
Okay. And this actually, your story about your parents and their languages, it proved my long-standing belief, and that only first 3 languages are difficult. Then it just goes really, really easy. And I based my theory on the story of my childhood hero, Henry Schliemann, the famous archaeologist who discovered Troy. And I don't know if you know, I used to be an archaeologist in my former life.
I didn't know that. That's really cool.
Yes, yeah, I was an archaeologist for 14 years, and I'm still reading pretty much everything I can get my hands on about archaeology and ancient history. And I train my Google Assistant to deliver me actually fresh news every day. Yeah, but
Wow.
well, Henry Schliemann was the man who grew up in Germany, then he moved to Russia, then he moved to United States, and then he moved to Greece. So kind of similar trajectory, and he knew all these languages. Actually, he knew about 7 or 8 languages altogether. And that's what he said. But it brings me to your museum because basically I'm very envy of future archaeologists because
Yeah.
yeah, I'm envy. I envy future archaeologists because they when they will look at your videos and analyze your museum, they will have such a wealth of interpretation that they will be able not just to like, this is a trash. Actually, I'm sorry. You picked up a lot of trash. Let's put it this way. Somebody's trash is somebody's treasure. It's a saying. Yeah, because a lot of people would throw this stuff away, but they have no idea what to do with that, right?
Sometimes valuable pieces of history gets thrown away, but you know, many of the items are definitely not, trash. Although I find that when an item is first invented, once it's no longer in vogue, that first 5, 10 years before it becomes an antique, people start throwing them away. So records go to the garbage. Those first few years when it becomes obsolete, people consider it obsolete. And it's only 5 or 10 years later that nostalgia starts to kick in and people go, oh my God, this is a Thomas Edison wax cylinder, you know? But of course, in the year 1929, people said, oh, that was your grandma's record player, you know?
It's like, right. It's like an article I read this morning about about a teen girl who mom bought a cassette player somewhere in an antique store. She bought a cassette player, and this girl, 15-year-old girl, was trying to figure out how to work it. It became a viral sensation on TikTok, I believe. So it just showed how these things are. And
Yeah.
now, actually,
Like
that
these things, the rotary telephones.
Oh yeah, I still remember how to use them. But actually, now I understand. I understand how these things happen because when I was in archaeology, one of the things I observed all the time was Renaissance, mini Renaissance. Like you had a specific style of ceramics, right? And it was very popular. It was all around the area, or specific style of jewelry or piece of clothing, etc. Something fun, and then it just disappeared. But after one generation, not one, 2 generations later, it appeared again. And now I understand how it happens because every probably tribe had its own Denny Daniels who collected all this old things, and then he showed young people how to use them when they were telling them all the stories related to these things and all the oral traditions of their tribe. They just kept, the people were like, oh yeah, it's cool again. So you are pretty much a keeper of the human of the memory of our civilization.
Yes, so I'm the time capsule. I guess every other generation needs a Denny Daniel or a Museum of Interesting Things to preserve the previous generations.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. It's
Culture.
so it's a very, very important function. So now, when we kind of made a bridge, made a bridge to the museum, we understand the deep philosophical purpose. Tell me please, how did you start? What prompted you to?
Well, and I wanted to mention now that we're in this kind of timeline bridging, so the next thing to do is what to do with it, and that is to take it what I do with it, which is I'll take it to schools or a library or an event like the Multicultural Arts Exchange, and do, you know, and expose those items to the public so that they learn from that past, so that they make a better future, and so that the present doesn't start from the present. You get all the links in the chain from the past to the present to make a future. And that makes for a better future because you can learn from the advantages and disadvantages of the previous inventions. And how it started, so to answer that question, people always ask me, you know, how did you start? What had happened? And I finally came up with a response that kind of fits with almost all our entrepreneurs. For every person, you know, entrepreneur, anyone who starts something, there's always two impetuses. One is that person has a passion for something. And the second one is often bad bosses. So usually you're emancipating yourself from something.
Okay, okay. So can you tell a story about bad boss that kind of inspired you?
Oh my God. There's so many funny, you know, obviously at the time they weren't funny, but there's so many funny stories that I've been through. One of my favorite was when I was doing a lot of graphic design and Photoshop retouch, there was a boss that just was so toxic and abusive. He made me at one time, he made me go into the bathroom and stare at the toilet for 3.5 minutes till it flushed, and cursed and yelled at me. You are going to effing stay in this toilet, and you're going to stay and blah, 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 until for 3.5 minutes. And everybody in the office heard it and were like terrified for me and said, Denny, please don't take that personally. He's gone crazy. We're waiting for him to retire. And I said, how could I not take that personally? It's the worst thing ever anyone's ever said to me. It's great, stare at a toilet. So I swore after that, when I did the museum, that I would never, ever give anyone the opportunity to make me stare at a toilet for 3.5 minutes, unless it was an antique toilet and I was learning about the Roman plumbing.
Okay, okay, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. And so, and how did you develop passion for this?
So ever since I was a kid, I was always collecting things and interested in, you know, I think it comes with being a musician or an artist. You enjoy patterns, and you know, there's something about collecting that has that kind of syncopated beat, that pattern. You know, the passage of time. I like to call it watching the grains of sand fall until you have a beach. And so, you know, I would collect almost everything as a kid. I mean, everything from little batteries and cardboard things. And then I would create cities in my basement using the batteries and the cardboard and all my toys and everything. And eventually comic books like Spider-Man. And I got to meet Stan Lee with the museum. So I, you know, and then it went from comic books to records. I was a huge Beatle fan, so collected everything having to do with them and learning the whole history. And each thing I would collect, I would have my friends come over and I'd tell stories. Even as a kid, we created a fake radio station where I just used a tape deck and we would record our voices and created a radio station. and all that. And then in high school, my teachers taught me about antique books. My English teacher, who now is the CEO of History Channel, but then she was just an English teacher, and she taught me Charles Dickens. That got me into antique literature and stuff like that. And I bought an old Victrola around the corner from my house for $1. And that became my first antique. And then when I got into NYU, I started studying literature and history and philosophy and politics and even economics. I had 2 majors, and I had 2 degrees and 4 majors. And I started buying antique books at that point. And by the time I graduated NYU, I'd already owned 250 antique books, way before I did the museum. So then once I started to have these, crazy jobs and all these things, I realized I want to do something more. I want to leave something, change the world a little bit, my mitzvah job. And I wasn't doing that. But we were throwing parties, my friends were throwing birthday parties in my apartment where I'd show all my things, because there was stuff everywhere, as you can see in the background. And my friends had interesting friends, writers for Mad Magazine or The Onion, and DJs for WBAI. And they were guinea pigs for 2 years. And then I tried my elementary school to see maybe this will work as a thing. And newspapers that said they wouldn't even show up gave me the front page in color. So I knew I touched a nerve. And that was the beginning of the museum over 10 years ago.
And it's actually amazing that during all these 10 years, you were able to sustain it. And I understand that you didn't get some super financing to do that. It's just endless energy, and you're actually amazing storytelling abilities. Because that's what when I was watching your show, I was more interested, even not in those things that you showed, but stories behind it and the way you present it. So it's one of the questions just popped up in my head. You collected an amazing thing, a lot of amazing things, not just interesting, but amazing things and historical. Like when you told me about those musical records on the X-ray, on X-ray films, I've never heard about this, and I was able later to confirm with my musician friends that they did it. But do you have a kind of program to sustain it? To sustain this museum after you won't have that as much energy to continue?
So we at first, I loved the freedom of just being able to travel all over the country to schools, libraries, and things. But before one of my shows at Coney Island, I broke 4 ribs and had to have emergency surgery, and everyone was terrified. And I even did the show with 4 broken ribs on stage because, show must go on.
Sure.
But everyone asked me, do you have a will? What happens to all the items? And I was like, oh my God. And we started to realize we have to have a plan in case I get trampled by moose or something in New York City. So I figured, I've spoken with my friends from History Channel to Science Channel. They're all worried. They all say, there's a business could, someone could sell off the things, they could sell off the property. So I decided the best thing to do is eventually we're going to get ourselves a location. And I think it should be based in New York, but travel around the country. And then we figure we're going to donate it when I pass to New York State, to New York City. And, once you give things to the people, even if it's a vacant lot in the East Village, the minute they plant 3 tomatoes in it, they decide that's ours, you can't take it back. Even if it's private property.
Right.
Once you give it to the people and their kids grow up going to it,
Mhm.
you know, they start to gain a passion for it as well and a nostalgia for it. And so we figure that will make it last forever, breathe life into it and make it last forever
Mhm.
when all of us are gone. Because if I left it to you, as far as I know, even though you're an archaeologist, you may not live forever.
No,
You
I
may
didn't discover the fountain of youth. Let's put it this
not
way.
yet. You're working on it. I heard
I'm
this.
working on it, yeah, but not yet.
Yeah, we haven't found the fountain of youth yet, and the longevity forever.
But it
Um,
might happen. It might happen even in our lifetime, according to some futurologists. You know.
at the bare minimum, I might find a time machine, but that's the bare minimum I might do. So we
Okay.
figure if we leave it to the public, then
Mhm.
and I had no clue over the past week how it's affected people already. You know, I put that word out that during COVID we could use some help, and people came out of nowhere. People who'd seen us for a moment and went back to Florida, emailed and said, let me help, and I didn't, and wrote me such beautiful, touching messages. I got so many hundreds of messages.
Mhm.
I had no clue that already it had touched people to that extent, that it really makes you realize that it's important to pass, you know, as an archaeologist, as a museum curator, as an educator, as anything, even if you make ice cream in an ice cream shop, it's
Sure.
important to inspire people and to make them happy and learn and
Yeah,
enjoy.
and it's actually a great tradition in America that I already kind of had a chance to notice so many times when somebody is creating something and it becoming important to the people, they leave it to the state. I just phrase that when this happened, and it won't be the same situation like it happened, for example, with circus museum in Sarasota. But I just been there, and they uh, left also Wrigley Brothers family. They left building to the state of Florida, and it was in disrepair and disregard for about 50 years. And the state actually spent instead of $1 million that they spent to build this building, state spent $15 million
Wow.
to restore it. But I've seen it over and over and over again. How many museums I went in Philadelphia, in Sarasota, in other cities, when somebody is created, build something beautiful, and then leave it to people, and it's a great tradition.
Yeah, I'll have to research that and see how they did it, what kind of paperwork, how it worked, because
Mhm.
it's I definitely want to do it right. Because at the end of the day, the only thing you leave behind is the people that you inspire.
That's on this very inspiring quote. We need to uh, wrap up our conversation. And it was pleasure as always. It went as we planned, a little bit unexpected ways, but it actually, I think it did well. It did well, and
It
I
happens with
wish.
of
Hmm?
interesting things.
Yeah, that's what happens. You start with one thing and you go to another. And the same thing happened in my Darts Connect and Musings. I start with one thing, it leads to another, to another, to another, and here we go. So I
Oh,
really.
we should mention if people want to find it, then you can go to museumofinterestingthings.com or .org.
Mhm.
And then once a week or once every so often, we do a speakeasy where we show old 16mm films, which we actually did for your organization.
Yes,
And that's
yes.
under the Secret Speakeasy website. So either
Mhm.
Museum of Interesting Things or Secret Speakeasy.
Secret Space.
But that way
Absolutely, absolutely. And I really hope that this podcast will see some of my friends lawyers, and they will get in touch with you and help you to work out all these details.
yes, and some teachers and some librarians.
Absolutely, teachers and artists. And one last question I have, and we'll wrap up. I know you're a musician and you're actually a graphic designer. Did you ever try to create a song based on inspired by the things you collect?
You know, I've never done a song inspired by the things I collect. Most of the songs, you know, were based on life experiences or other people that inspired me because of their life experiences. That's usually where most of the songs come from. That's what I find. I thought you were going to ask me if I was like Kandinsky, where I combined music with Photoshop. And
Well, actually, it's would be a topic for another conversation because that's
yes.
what we did. That's what my other program, Magical Arts Net, is about. It's combining different form of arts and creating something new. But again, it's a topic.
Wow, that's a cool topic. Yes.
Yeah, it's another. You know, again, it's a topic for another conversation. And on this optimistic note, I'll say goodbye and until we meet again real soon.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.